start?
I don't take a very good picture.
All right. So to start, could you please say your name, your rank, and just a little bit about your work in the military in general?
Yeah, Robert Boyle, rank is was a Spec 4, Specialist 4th Class.
Just where were you stationed?
Oh, okay. I enlisted at Fort Holabird in Baltimore, Maryland. Took my basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Went to Fort Rucker for AIT, which is advanced training for helicopter mechanic. Then I went to Vietnam. And from Vietnam, I came back and stayed at Fort Bragg until I separated the military.
What made you decide to join the service when you first enlisted?
It was what a lot of young men did. You were going to get drafted. I was number 3 on the list to be drafted in March of 1971.
Okay.
So I enlisted because if you enlisted, then you could do pretty much what you wanted to do if you had the right scores, test scores.
Right. What was it like the first day you got to Vietnam?
Scary. You climb off an airplane, you step out here on the tarmac, which is, the taxiway, and of course all the stories you hear, first thing you think is, oh man, they're going to start dropping bombs, they're going to start shooting at you. So you get off the airplane, and that's kind of the way your head's set, right? But that wasn't the case at all. So we walked around the first hour scared to death until we found out that where we came in, we really weren't at too much of a risk. And then got in there, and then they deployed you off to the camps, to the military bases that you had to go to. So,
what area specifically in Vietnam?
I was in I Corps, which was, Vietnam was broke down into 4 corps, 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And I was in I Corps, which was up towards the DMZ. I flew out of Da Nang. So,
what was the situation like around there during the
not
war?
a lot of stuff during the day, but at night you'd get, because I was on an air base, you had helicopters and revetments, and they would try to get to your equipment. A lot of times you'd get mortars in on you at nighttime. You didn't know where they were coming from. Everybody had to go run into the bunkers and things like that. But that probably happened at least a couple times a week.
What was your average day like while you were there?
Work on your helicopter, fly, come back, drop off the people that you were taking off, and get another load and go. And then when you were finished, you refueled your helicopter, did the inspections, made sure it was safe for flight the next mission or the next morning.
Can you describe what taking troops and dropping them off the helicopter, how that process kind of went, what that was kind of like?
Well, you loaded up in the morning from the airfield and you took off and you went to LZ landing zone, they called them, and you'd have designated LZs that you would go to, and you came in and you just landed and just hit the ground. They discharged from the helicopter and you were right straight back up. Sometimes you'd get shot at, sometimes you wouldn't. You really didn't know what was going to happen.
How many times would you think you got shot at compared to not?
Probably 50–60% of the time.
What was the hardest part about that whole process?
Sitting there in the door behind an M60, looking out, seeing another human out there, knowing they're going to shoot at you. It's hard to contemplate one human shooting at another, right? So and then real quick when you find out, you kind of start survival thinking.
How do you think your time in Vietnam, what do you think changed the most about you compared to what you were like before and then coming out of that? What do you think changed the most? How many lessons you learned or something like that?
I think you learn to respect life and individuals differently. My experience in Vietnam, I became impatient a lot, right? Because over there it was doing what you have to do for everybody to survive. You couldn't hesitate. You couldn't wait. It was reaction. Which when coming back home, coming back to the States as we called it, was a little impatient, and because we was over there, I was there almost a year, and if you wanted to drink a beer, you drank a beer. You didn't, and the rules back here were different, so you kind of had to adapt all over again. You see young people, and you hear people talking about, "Oh, I'm going to kill you," and that really gets to me, because if you're in the situation and you have to do it, it's not as easily done as it is easily said. And sometimes if I'd hear you tell your friend that, I would challenge him. And I'd say, "Wait, what did you just say?" So you think a lot more of life and people.
Yeah. So, how was towards the end of the deployment when you knew you were going to be headed home? How'd that kind of change how you felt about where you were there? Like maybe like the last month leading up to you getting back home. What was that kind of like?
In the unit I was in, when you were flying, when you got orders to go back home, you didn't have to fly anymore, because helicopter crew, for the most part, had a short life expectancy in Vietnam. So once you got orders to come back home, probably the best thing about it was you knew you didn't have to fly anymore. Yeah. You started getting anxious. I couldn't sleep at night. I was like wanting to hurry up and go by, because I wanted to come back home. I wanted to get back with them.
Right. How far in advance did you get your orders that you were headed back home?
About 9 days.
Oh wow. So it was a pretty short time then.
Well, they probably had the orders sooner than that, but they also knew that if they gave me my orders, then I didn't have to fly.
Right. Yeah.
And you had missions you had to be
Right.
done.
Yeah. What was your kind of last days you were leaving in Vietnam like?
Just anticipation.
Yeah.
Getting out of here, going home, knowing that you could have a mortar attack at night and it could come right in on your hooch. You don't know. So it was always, you kind of got more on alert. I spent a lot of time between the sandbags.
Yeah.
Yeah.